Welcome to Redefining Medicine, an intimate and personalized program that illustrates a different side of the practice of medicine. Our in-depth conversations will focus on mentors and motivators who are consistently reshaping, redefining, and rediscovering the field of medical healthcare. I would like to welcome Dr. Dr. Bryan, a globally recognized authority in nitric oxide research and assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine. Credited with several significant discoveries in nitric oxide function and metabolism, in addition to multiple patents, Dr. Bryan has published extensively in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
So thank you for joining us, Dr. Bryan, right off your talk on the oral microbiome and hypertension. So what would you say would be the single most important, poignant thought that you would have hoped to deliver to your audience today?
Well, it's quite simple. I mean, I've spent the last 17 years trying to educate the masses on the importance of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is one of the most important molecules produced in the body of humans. Unfortunately, very few physicians and medical healthcare practitioners understand what nitric oxide is and how it's related to the underlying problems of many of their patients. So that's been my single objective for the past couple of decades, is trying to communicate the importance of nitric oxide to really anybody who'd listen.
So it's funny, when I was doing some background on you, getting some background, I looked at nitric oxide and I said, wait a minute, isn't that what I get at the dentist's office? So clearly there's a different, that's
nitrous oxide.
Nitrous oxide,
yeah, N2O,
okay.
and this is nitric oxide,
Got it.
NO.
Okay, I didn't do very well in chemistry, clearly. So let's go back to the early years and what made you go on to study, was it microbiology, or what did you study initially in college?
It was biochemistry.
Biochemistry. Okay, what was your fascination?
Well, probably not untypical to most high school kids. They get counseling from their high school counselor of kind of the career choice. I always excelled at math and science. So my counselors told me I should go be an engineer. So I enrolled at the University of Texas at Austin in civil engineering, really not knowing what I was going to do or why I was there. When I asked what civil engineers do, and they go, well, they build roads and build bridges. And I go, I'm not interested in that. So then I got involved in the College of Natural Science and biochemistry degree and did a lot of undergraduate research. This is in the very early 90s when a lot of protein biochemistry was starting to be overexpressed in bacteria, and so we could cloning and overexpressing certain proteins in bacterial systems was becoming mainstream. And so that was very interesting to me, that you could actually look at a specific disease process at the protein and molecular level, and then had the model systems that you could actually investigate that. So then after my degree in biochemistry, I realized that probably the job market wasn't great for a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, so I knew I had to further my education, and then I enrolled at Louisiana State University School of Medicine, really with the intent, I mean, it was always kind of my ambition to be an MD PhD, because I could use my science background to really begin to interrogate disease processes at the fundamental molecular level. Fortunately or unfortunately, however how you look at it, we made a lot of seminal discoveries in the nitric oxide field. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s, right after the Nobel Prize was awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. So we knew it was really a fundamental discovery in cardiovascular medicine, and there was a lot of still unknown about nitric oxide. And so I decided to just spend my entire career on studying this single molecule nitric oxide. We had the tools to measure nitric oxide production in biological systems. We developed analytical methods that could really begin to provide a fingerprint of NO-biology in many different disease conditions. And then the research suggested that we could figure out what goes wrong in people that can't make nitric oxide. And then through a series of discoveries and observations, we discovered how to make nitric oxide in the human body. And this has really been, I think it's, big pharmaceutical companies have been trying to do this for the past 30 years, and nitric oxide is one of these molecules that's very reactive. It has a half-life of less than 1 second. So to be able to develop technology that could restore and recapitulate NO-based signaling in nitric oxide production in the human body it's very complicated. And fortunately, through some very good training and collaborations with the people who won the Nobel Prize, I was fortunate enough to be put in the right place at the right time and have the discoveries that we've been able to translate now into humans, into a safe and effective technology that's have a number of patents on and published clinical trials that see remarkable effects. So the overall point is that we now have the tools and the methods to understand patients or humans with a nitric oxide problem. How does that manifest in their clinical presentation? And then perhaps most importantly, we now know how to safely and effectively fix the underlying problem.
So what do you think your guidance counselor would say to you now?
Well, I still talk to her. I live in the town in which I graduated high school, so it's a very small, tight-knit community. It's a population of about 1,500 people. So I still keep in contact with a lot of my old teachers and high school friends, and so I'm very fortunate to be able to live in the town in which I grew up.
And I'm sure they say, I knew that Nathan, he would go far in life.
Some people may have thought that, others probably not.
So did you ever have have you had any regrets about not going for that MD?
No, I haven't. I mean, over the course of my career, I've seen, and my objective was to always stay in academia. It's the research and the curiosity and the inquisitive nature of my personality that I knew I would always be kind of in a research environment. And the good thing about basic science and academia is you have full intellectual freedom. I can ask any biological question that I want and then design the appropriate experiments to answer that question. Sometimes we get the answer we thought, and sometimes we get the answer that we didn't even think about. But I think that's the beauty of discovery, is having the the astuteness to recognize those unintended observations and being able to appreciate what that means. You don't always get what you're looking for. And in fact, in science, it's what we're not looking for that usually leads to the discoveries.
The passion that you have for this exudes out of every pore. It's so obvious, and you kind of light up when you're talking about it. What other interests do you have in your personal life?
Well, this gives me great gratitude because, I get dozens, if not hundreds of emails every week, every month on people whose lives we've impacted in a positive manner with this technology we've developed. And so there's really nothing more gratifying than changing the lives of others. In fact, it's been said that if you change the life of one person, you've changed the world. You certainly changed their world. And so that's what drives me now, is really continuing to move the science forward and to educate as many people as I can. But so that gives me great personal satisfaction. But in my personal life, I live in a small town. I live out on a ranch. I have horses. I raise cattle.
You left your cowboy hat at home, I see.
I did, but as a kid, I grew up roping calves and riding horses, and now my weekend hobbies, I continue to rope and ride horses and raise my kids out on a ranch like I grew up.
Amazing. That's beautiful. Have you had any obstacles that you faced along the way?
Where should we start?
Well, we only have 30 minutes, so it's up to you.
Yeah, life is full of obstacles. I mean, you encounter obstacles every day. Some seem insurmountable at first, but I think what determines success or failure is not how many times you get knocked down, but how many times you get up and keep putting one foot in front of the other. So yeah, there were many obstacles from both early on in coming from a divorced family, and then having to fund my own education. I had scholarships, but I didn't have any family support to fund my education, so I had to work all through college, and obviously that's not easy, working 2 to 3 jobs to pay for your own college education. And then, moving away, growing up in a small town, and then moving to Louisiana, and did my fellowship training in Boston, moving several thousands away from the ranch and the family with no really family support. Obviously it's challenging, but here's what I've learned. Those challenges and obstacles really mold you into the person you eventually become. And so I think pressure makes diamonds, and I've encountered a lot of pressure and certainly a lot of obstacles along the way.
So how were you first introduced to A4M?
Back in 2010, we learned about the A4M, and my motive and motivation being trying to educate as many people about nitric oxide as I could. I recognized it gave me a new platform to teach really a different style of physician and physicians who think differently than the conventional medical concept. And so we've been involved with the anti-aging conference since 2011. I think I've spoken at both the spring and Vegas event every year since 2011. And I've seen, it's really remarkable to see the adoption of what we do, because when we first started, and this has only been 6 years ago, but there was so little awareness around nitric oxide. And so it was a new concept to a lot of people. Now, as the awareness around nitric oxide has become a little bit more apparent, especially in these docs and audience who thinks outside the box, the adoption of what we do has really been very well received. And again, that's gratifying too. And I think, again, one of the most gratifying things is not just the education, but really the relationships we build with these doctors. Some of these doctors I met here 5 years ago have become some of my best friends. And then I get to hear the stories of their patients and how they've been able to impact their patients' lives and make them better when they really thought they'd reached the end of medical treatment with no success. So this is what makes it fun. It's the relationships, it's the stories of hearing how you've changed people's lives, and that gets me up every morning with a smile on my face.
If not, the cattle calls in the morning might get you up too, really.
That's right.
How have you been able to penetrate, or have you been able to penetrate and make a dent into the conventional practitioner and those cardiologists?
Well, cardiologists are probably the most difficult people to change the way they think. But here's what we've witnessed, that the current medical paradigm does not work. I think it's becoming apparent, especially today, that even though we're the most advanced nation on the face of the earth, we have the sickest people. And I think it's because the standard medical paradigm and the way we treat and educate physicians and future physicians is based on treating symptoms and coding and reimbursement and making a diagnosis and then treating, but without any regard to what's the underlying problem. And it gets down to really a lot of basic biochemistry and physiology that most physicians forget when they get out in practice. And so for me, it's really simple, because to me, good medicine is applied physiology. So you got to figure out what goes wrong in people. Obviously, there's a problem. And then if you can figure out that problem and then give the body what it needs to fix the problem, then that's how you get people better. And that's the beauty of the people that attend the A4M events, is they get that. They want to get to the root of the problem and realize that, and many of these people have practiced conventional medicine for a number of years and finally get tired of seeing their same patient come back over and over again. Obviously, they're not making them better. So you got to think differently.
In your field, what do you often see as the catalyst?
Well, I think there's some truth to it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And so retraining and trying to make physicians think differently about how they were trained is very difficult. So I think a lot of this comes from the patients. And we certainly recognize that, and we try to go out and we have a huge effort to educate patients. And I think healthcare today needs to be proactive, and I think patients are educating physicians now. And I think a lot of these docs, it's embarrassing when your patient asks you a question that you can't answer. So those that are astute enough to adapt and learn new things so that they can answer their patients' questions, and then the patients educate them, or at least inquire about certain things, then forces them to at least do a literature check or check into it and educate themselves. But I think there's too much pressure now to continue to do what we do in medicine without thinking differently. And I think this new way of practicing medicine, of understanding how the human body works and then fixing the underlying problem rather than giving a drug or treating a symptom. I mean, we've done that for 100 years now without success. So it's time to change the model.
What do you hope your legacy will be?
I hope my legacy is one that I really made a difference. And I think that's, relative. But, I mean, I've certainly been committed to the science and still myself learning more in the nitric oxide field. But I hope when people hear the name Nathan Bryan in many years to come that, I really transformed the way that people thought about cardiovascular medicine and restoring nitric oxide production in the human body, because I truly believe, and I think the science supports this, that you cannot get well, and physicians cannot get their patients well if they don't fix their nitric oxide, because it's a ubiquitous molecule that's involved in regulating many different physiological processes, and there's not a single disease out there that's not associated with reduced nitric oxide production, whether it's Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, whether it's diabetic neuropathy, or whether it's glaucoma, macular degeneration, you name it. It's all in the published literature showing that it's a dysregulation of nitric oxide production. It's the foundation for how our body works. And so you can't practice anti-aging medicine if you don't fix the nitric oxide production pathway. And so I want to be remembered as that guy who did that.
Do you hope that it will be, that your knowledge will be integrated into medical school programs and it's actually taught from that level?
I think it eventually will have to be. I was on the faculty at University of Texas Medical School in Houston for 9 years. I taught in the medical and graduate school. And I advocated for that. And it was not until there was probably 4 or 5 years where it became part of the curriculum. So at least we had one course on the molecular basis of cell signaling that included a nitric oxide component. But I'm not aware of any other medical school that does that. I think as the science advances and the awareness around nitric oxide and the importance of nitric oxide begins to manifest over time, then I think it will have to be included in the training of physicians and part of their core curriculum. Because a lot of people coming out of medical school, they kind of have a conversational knowledge of it at best, but they don't understand the true biochemistry and enzymology of nitric oxide and even how that relates to the people they see in the clinic, and whether it's, again, psychiatry, cardiology, OB-GYNs, or whatever discipline of medicine you go in, you have to begin to consider that there's a dysregulation of nitric oxide if that person's sick.
You had shared earlier that it's quite validating when you receive a phone call from whether it's a patient or a physician. Can you share a story that you know offhand about some success?
Yeah, there's the story that I always share it happened early on when I was at the University of Texas Medical School as a basic scientist, and really the Texas Medical Center is a really special place because it's the world's largest medical center. You've got many hospitals in one concentrated area, many different medical schools, academic institutions. So it gives you an opportunity to collaborate with the best and brightest minds and interdisciplinary collaboration. And that spirit, I think, showed itself back in 2010, where it was a pediatrician at Texas Children's Hospitals who's a specialist in pediatric inborn errors in metabolism. So these rare diseases that, if it's a rare, complicated disease, they come to Texas Children's, and Brendan Lee figures this out. And so he had a group of patients that he couldn't really explain based on their clinical presentation. He knew it was a urea cycle disorder, and so we started collaborating and trying to model this human disease in mice, which is, in science they say we want to go from bench to bedside, and that model really doesn't work. I think what works is you have physicians and clinicians who have these complex cases, and then you go to the research lab and you model that the best way you can to recapitulate human disease. And then in experimental animals or cells, you can manipulate the system and offer different treatment modalities. And so it's really bedside to bench, figured out, and then back to bedside. But anyway, to make a long story short, there was this kid with this urea cycle disorder that had he had renal disease, he had resistant hypertension, he had a neurological deficit from his genetic disorder. And the best treatment, the standard of care, the best way they treated these particular patients he wasn't getting better. And so through this series of interactions and discoveries, we found that we had a nitric oxide technology that could basically overcome this kid's own genetic disorder. And so we began to try this, and we published this back in 2011, but this kid was 15 years old. He had uncontrolled hypertension. He's certainly at risk for stroke and renal failure and a number of other conditions that are caused by chronic hypertension. But we were able to normalize his blood pressure with our nitric oxide technology. We get him off all prescription medications. The kid's now 20 or 21 years old. He graduated high school.
You're still in touch?
I am still in touch. And his parents send me nice emails on occasions and just send me pictures of Jonathan when he went to the prom and graduated high school. But it was really touching because we saved the kid's life. When the medical therapy, as he knew it, he had reached the end of the line. So that was really a touching story because as a basic scientist, I'm not involved in patient care, but to be pulled into these complex cases and then kind of deconvolute the mysteries around these rare diseases gives me great pleasure. And then, to see that effect on him, it's probably the most gratifying thing.
So if you weren't doing what you're doing today, what do you think you'd be doing?
Really, I can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, this fulfills me. I mean, it gets me my intellectual curiosity. I think of a new question every day. There's lots of mysteries in medicine, and I think we now have the tools and the methods to figure a lot of this out. And so that keeps me going, is trying to figure out what other mystery can we solve. But everybody has to have their downtime, and if I wasn't doing this, I would probably spend the time out on my ranch and feeding the cows and riding horses and living a low-key life, probably.
How old are your children?
I have an 18, 9, and a 6-year-old.
Oh, wow.
3 boys.
Do the younger ones understand nitric oxide?
They do. My 9-year-old teaches his teachers and classmates about nitric oxide and foods and diets that would help their nitric oxide production. So he watches videos of me online, and he's almost a little mini-me. He's very inquisitive. But the 6-year-old probably not so much. He knows, only thing he knows is Daddy's gone a lot.
And your 18-year-old, what is his interest?
18-year-old is a basketball player at a Division III school in
Nice.
Texas. So he is in college playing basketball, trying to make the grades.
With a little help from nitric oxide, or does that not improve your
basketball
game?
Well, interesting enough, it does.
I
mean, but he's not interested in science at all.
Wow, that's great. So, other than your spending time on the ranch, your incredible passion for what you do you have any other hobbies or interests?
I like to play golf. I'm not a very good golfer, but I like the downtime. I can go out and spend time. My kids are good golfers, so it allows me a venue to go out and spend quality time with the kids and have some fun. But mainly, we like to get on our gator and ride around the pasture and feed the cows and enjoy the rural life.
It sounds like a wonderful way to spend your days. So through your involvement with your studies as well as your participation here at A4M, have you made any personal lifestyle changes within your own home, whether it's dietary or integrating anything else, whether it's medical treatment, etc.?
Absolutely. You can't come to these conferences and listen to the quality lectures and not make adjustments and changes in your lifestyle, because I think we realize that life is so precious, and it's not the duration of life that we live, it's really the quality of life that we live in. I see sick people, relatively young people that really have a poor quality of life, and knowing what I know, you can fix them, but yet it's about compliance. Are they willing to take the steps necessary to change what they eat, change their lifestyle, change what they do, understand what's really going on in their body. And some people are willing to do that because they're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and others not. And fortunately for me, I have the knowledge from these events to share with that to them. But, unless they're here to hear it themselves and experience it, then most people aren't. But yeah, we've made a number of changes from our diet to, the importance of the microbiome and how we affect the bacteria in and on our body. Whether it's, not taking or getting outside and getting dirty and repleting and not being scared of bacteria because they're necessary for us. And so I think at the end of the day, it's really not rocket science. It's exercise and good nutrition. And so I think as long as we get out and get enough moderate physical exercise and spend some time out and getting inoculated with all these bacteria, whether it's from playing in the dirt or getting out and walking on the ocean to eating good quality foods. If we do that then and get rid of toxins that burden our body, then we can be healthy and free of disease.
Are your kids compliant with that when they're not at home?
I wish I could say yes, but I know that they're not. Because, the pressures of the society we live in are too much, especially for young kids. And I don't want to deprive my kids of the simple joys in life. And no young kid wants to eat raw vegetables and not eat a lot of sugary foods and junk food. But, on occasions, you have to reward them. And my philosophy is what you do one day a week won't kill you. What you do the other six probably will.
What's your cheat food? What's your one day a week splurge?
For me?
Yes.
My weakness is ice cream. And so I typically avoid it, but on occasions I will reward.
Do you go right for the Haagen-Dazs, or are you just middle of the road?
Well, I'm from Texas. We have Bluebell.
Oh, Bluebell. So do you go for the entire gallon that they sell, or the?
No, I think still I can convince myself that moderation is best, even under those situations.
So do you have any role models today? I know that earlier on in your education you had obviously incredible inspiration from the scientists that you had the privilege of studying under. Do you have any role models today or any mentors that you turn to?
Professionally, I've got a lot of colleagues that we interact with, exchange ideas. Is there one that stands out? Probably not, but I think my biggest role model would probably be my dad.
Care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so my dad's a paraplegic from a car accident in 1984. And so I was 10 or 11 at the time, and I see my dad living really probably now half his life in a wheelchair, raising kids, and we talked about overcoming obstacles, and I look back and think, yeah, we all encounter obstacles, but to see what he's overcome, and even today, 34 years later after his accident, and still relatively moderately healthy. He's very active, very independent man, and so when I think that life isn't going my way, I look back and really realize that it's probably not that bad. So he keeps me going. He's overcome a lot.
I'm sure he's incredibly proud of you.
I think he is.
And sadly, probably the one thing that nitric oxide can't help.
Well, it certainly can't affect his spinal cord injury, but what it has been able to do is a guy that's now sedentary by design from his accident, and who doesn't have a good diet or lead a very active lifestyle. What we have been able to do with the nitric oxide technology is get him off blood pressure medicines. We've been able to normalize his blood pressure, at least keep his cardiovascular system in a healthy state. In fact, he just had an angiogram about 3 months ago. Dad's 69. He's been in a wheelchair for 34 years. Eats not the ideal diet. And the cardiologist told us when we went in that he was expecting a lot of blockage and buildup in his coronary arteries. And when he came out, he said, "I've never seen such coronary arteries in a 69-year-old paraplegic. Less than 10% buildup or occlusion in all of his coronaries." He goes, "I see patients half your age with severe advanced coronary disease." And so I think we can attribute that to, getting him on the nitric oxide support therapy that we developed, and I think that's kept him going. Paraplegics don't live that long once they have the accident. It's just because of all the other comorbidities of a sedentary lifestyle, and really what they're unable to do usually leads to a shortened life. But Dad, despite 34 years in a wheelchair, is a relatively healthy, energetic, plays with the grandkids, and
I'm sure he's an extraordinary influence and inspiration on your children as well.
Yeah, he is. I mean, we're reminded when we see him how resilient he is, and when you think things aren't going your way, it could always probably be much worse. And it's not, it's how you deal with the obstacles that really defines who you are.
Thank you for sharing such a personal story.
Thank you.